What does it mean to understand one another? Can there be happiness without suffering? Can there be acceptance without rejection? Will mankind ever truly be able to understand itself? One of the most important pieces of animated media of the 20th century, a piece of art that still has fans and enthusiasts clamoring over interpretation and theory. A story so iconic that it has been referenced and cited as inspiration in countless shows, movies, games, and anime. A story of a director's struggle with himself, and a story that explores parts of the human psyche some would rather be left unexplored, and an ending so controversial that it will likely continue to plague online discussion boards forever. This is Evangelion. To understand Evangelion, it is important to understand its director. Hideaki Anno was born on May 21st, 1960 in Ube, Japan. He began work on the anime The Super Dimension Fortress Macross, which ran from 1982 to 1983 while attending Osaka University for the Arts. He gained notoriety after his work on the Studio Ghibli film Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind. In 1984, Anno co-founded Studio Gainax after his directorial debut for Royal Space Force, The Wings of Honayamise in 1987. Gainax was handed down the anime Nadia, The Secret of Blue Water from NHK, which ran from 1990 to 1991 and was originally a concept by Hayao Miyazaki for Studio Ghibli. As the show was handed down to Gainax, Anno had very little control of the project, and it caused him to fall into a long depression. Born from this unstable, depressive mental state was the idea for the studio's next project, Neon Genesis Evangelion. A 35-page color proposal was drafted in 1993, which featured some concept art and early designs of the world, characters, and the titular Evangelions. The proposal also contained short summaries for each of the 26 episodes. The show began airing on TV Tokyo from October 1995 to March 1996. The show initially accumulated especially high ratings, but after the program was moved to a later time slot aimed at more mature audiences, the viewership started to grow. The series takes place in 2015, 15 years after an apocalyptic event known as Second Impact wiped out half of humanity. We follow Shinji Ikari, a 14-year-old boy who is reluctantly recruited by his estranged father to pilot Evangelion Unit 1, a massive humanoid weapon used to fight the enigmatic Angels to defend Tokyo 3, alongside fellow 14-year-old pilots Rei Ayanami and Asuka Langley-Soryu. The series becomes progressively darker and more disturbing as it goes on, due to Anno's mental state at the time of production. Neon Genesis Evangelion gained immense critical acclaim for its writing, focus on rather disturbing subject matter, and avant-garde storytelling, but also garnered a notorious amount of controversy, speculation, and infamy, sparked by the series' legendary final 2 episodes and the conclusion to the series, The End of Evangelion, a feature film released in 1997. The film continues to be one of the most controversial and discussed parts of Evangelion, as well as being a very important landmark film in animation. The best way to understand Evangelion is through its characters. Understanding Evangelion is like trying to understand an unknown machine. The individual parts and their purposes explain how the machine functions. Evangelion's characters are the parts. We can't understand the machine until we know what each part does. In this video, we will analyze 2 characters that provide the framework necessary to understand Evangelion. The best character to start off with is the commander of Nerve, absent father of Shinji Ikari, and husband of Yui Ikari, Gendo Ikari. Gendo is the puppeteer pulling the strings throughout the show, and is the man with the most intimate knowledge of the esoteric backgrounds of the Evangelions, Angels, Lilith, and Adam, As such, he is the lens through which most of the backstory of Evangelion can be explained. Born as Gendo Rokubungi, he met Ryui Ikari in college at Kyoto University, who was a student of metaphysical biology under Professor Kozo Fuyutsuki, the future sub-commander of NERV. Gendo married Yui and took their last name, Ikari. Yui apparently had ties to Sela, a shadow organization that was pulling the strings behind the world government of Evangelion, and it was rumored that Gendo only approached her as a means of getting close to Sela. After Second Impact in 2000, which caused environmental collapse and the deaths of half of humanity, Shinji Ikari was born on September 6, 2001. It was around this time that Gendo was appointed as the head of Gehern, the predecessor to NERV, by Sela. Kozo Fuyutsuki, working as an unlicensed doctor helping those affected by the Second Impact, was summoned by Gendo to work for Gehern, and likely out of his admiration for his former student Yui, he reluctantly accepted, becoming Gendo's right-hand man. The catalyst for Gendo Ikari's ultimate plan would come in 2004 during Gehern's Project E research, the plan to create the humanoid weapons known as Evangelion units by cloning the first angel, Adam. During a contact experiment in which a 4-year-old Shinji Ikari was present, Yui Ikari disappeared in Evangelion Unit 1. Following her disappearance, Gehern became NERV, Shinji was sent to live away from his father, and Gendo started to formulate his ultimate plan. Gendo likely learned the truth of the Second Impact, First Impact, the angels, Lilith, Adam, the scenes of life, moons, etc., from the Dead Sea Scrolls, texts apparently detailing the esoteric knowledge on the origins of life in the galaxy, something previously known only to the members of Sela, but later Gendo, Fuyutsuki, and Dr. Ritsuko Akagi to some extent. From this knowledge, Gendo is able to formulate his plan, the ultimate goal of which being to be reunited with his beloved wife Yui again. Side note, the following information is never detailed in the series or movie, but instead comes from the classified files. Information from the PlayStation 2 game Neon Genesis Evangelion 2. These documents detail most of the information available pertaining to the lore behind the series. Many see the canonicity of this information as dubious due to its separation from the series, but as it came directly from those who worked on the show, including director Hideaki Anno, it is considered canon. The scrolls detailed the first ancestral race, the creators of Lilith, Adam, the Lances of Longinus, and the Moons. About 4.6 billion years before the events of Evangelion, there was a race of extremely advanced and intelligent beings referred to only as the first ancestral race, likely the first intelligent life in the galaxy. It became clear to this race that they would soon face annihilation, so they resigned their species to their fate, but took measures to ensure that intelligent life would continue on in the galaxy. They created several, possibly 7, though this number has long been a subject of controversy, artificial beings known as seeds of life, beings of great power inhabited by the soul of a single member of the first ancestral race, which would be responsible for reseeding life on new worlds. The seeds were placed inside moons, large spherical ships that would carry them to their new worlds, along with a Lance of Longinus, a failsafe device used to deactivate a seed of life. These beings were also each given a fruit, which would determine the type of life that would spread on their new worlds. The 2 known fruits are the fruit of life and the fruit of knowledge. Whether the other seeds of life carry different fruits are unknown. The fruit of life would lead to angelic life, and the fruit of knowledge would lead to life similar to humanity. After the preparations were complete, the first ancestral race apparently abandoned their physical forms and boarded the moons as souls, inhabiting their respective seeds' chambers of Guff, metaphysical chambers used to house souls, waiting to be reborn as new life. However, the first ancestral race never intended for 2 seeds of life to land on the same planet, but by some cosmic coincidence, this had happened on Earth. At some point, the white moon, carrying the seed of life known as Adam, landed on Earth and began to produce what would have likely led to angelic life, as it was meant to. However, about 4 billion years before the events of the series, the black moon, carrying the seed of life Lilith, crash-landed on Earth, destroying its own Lance of Longinus. The debris from this crash would form the Earth's moon. This is known as first impact. Adam's Lance of Longinus promptly activated and placed Adam into stasis, preventing the spread of angelic life, life bearing the fruit of knowledge, in accordance with the first ancestral race's failsafe protocol if two seeds landed on the same planet. Lilith then began to spread life on Earth using its fruit of life, which led to humanity. Side note, this is also why Kaoru Nagisa refers to humanity as the Lilim, the children of Lilith, during his appearances in the series. Human life evolved, and eventually mankind discovered the Dead Sea Scrolls, documents apparently written by the first ancestral race, documenting their influence and their reseeding efforts. With the knowledge from the scrolls, the shadow government organization Sela would begin to lay the foundation for a master plan, and will create nerve to enact its will, unaware that its commander, Gendo Ikari, was scheming against them to incur his own outcome. Sela discovered the remains of the White Moon and Adam under Antarctica, still in stasis, as well as the Black Moon and Lilith underneath Hakone, Japan. Sela organized the Katsuragi expedition, led by Misato Katsuragi's father, to Antarctica with the goal of studying Adam. In reality, their purpose was to carry out a contact experiment, wherein members of the expedition used Adam's Lance of Longinus to somehow reduce him to a controllable embryonic state, and to also recover his soul. The outcomes of this were the brief awakening of Adam, which caused the second impact, wiping out half of humanity and destroying the environment, the deaths of all members of the Katsuragi expedition, save for only a young Misato Katsuragi, the recovery and reduction of Adam to an embryonic state, and the salvaging of Adam's soul, which was then implanted into the being known as Kaoru Nagisa, hence why he shares a birthday with the second impact. 4 years later, Gahern Researchers Project E, Yui Ikari vanishes into Eva Unit 1, the only Eva unit cloned from Lilith instead of Adam, and Shinji is sent to live away from his father. It is here that Gahern becomes Nerve, with its headquarters inside the Black Moon, referred to as the Geofront, underneath the fortress city of Tokyo 3, and Gendo begins laying out his master plan. Sometime later, Yui Ikari is cloned, implanted with the extracted soul of Lilith, and referred to as Rei Ayanami. The Evangelion units are created by Nerve with the help of Naoko Akagi and her daughter Ritsuko, continuing Yui's work. The Evangelion units are apparent clones of Adam, save for Unit 1, which was cloned from Lilith. They are not robots as they first appear, but are living beings merged with machinery and metal to be controllable weapons. However, the beings are artificial, like Kaoru and Rei, and as such have no souls of their own. Each needs to be implanted with one. Initially, we are told that the pilots are chosen by the Marduk Institute for their aptitude for piloting, and that they must be around age 13 to 14 so that they can properly sync with the Eva unit. However, it is later revealed by Triple Agent Ryoji Kaji that the Marduk Institute doesn't exist. Eva units are actually implanted with the soul of their respective pilot's mother so that the pilots can sync with the Eva better, unbeknownst to the pilots. Side note. As Evangelion Unit 1 is inhabited by the soul of Yui Ikari, it is important to note that Gendo Ikari is aware that Yui's soul is the control system for Unit 1, as he directly addresses Yui by name when speaking to Evangelion Unit 1 on more than one occasion. The mother's protective instincts also keep the pilot safe, with the boundaries of their souls manifesting as physical shields known as AT, or Absolute Terror, fields. Sometimes, the soul inhabiting the Eva takes control, referred to by Nerve staff as going berserk, as an effort by the pilot's mothers to protect their child. Kaji also reveals that the pool for future Evangelion pilots is actually every student in Shinji's class, as they all have deceased mothers whose souls can be put inside new Evangelion units, as is the case for Toji Suzuhara and Evangelion Unit 4. However, this is not true for Rei or Kaoru. Rei is a clone, she has no mother. The question of the soul inhabiting Unit 0 is a topic of much debate, but it is heavily implied by dialogue and shots from the series involving Unit 0 that the soul of Unit 0 is in fact the soul of Rei 1, the first Rei clone, who was murdered by Naoko Akagi. Rei and Shinji both see images of a distorted Rei when syncing with Unit 0. In fact, when this Rei speaks, she is directly referenced as Rei 1 in the episode's script, lending credence to the theory. However, this still doesn't make very much sense. How can someone's soul be in two places at once? In Rei 2 and Rei 1 inside the Evangelion unit? To answer this question, we need to look at the soul of Unit 2. The soul of Evangelion Unit 1 is Yui Ikari, but the soul of Unit 2 is half of the soul of Asuka's mother. Asuka's mother's contact experiment apparently went awry in some way, leaving her as a husk of a woman, with half of her soul in the Eva and the other half remaining in her body. The half in the Eva is thought to be the half that loves and wants to protect her daughter. This is likely why when Asuka's mother is shown, she seems to care little for her daughter, as well as being very insane. The fact that a being's soul can be split, or exist in multiple places, reinforces the theory that the soul of Unit 0 is Rei 1. However, Rei is an artificial being. She's a clone. Therefore, she is born without a soul. All Rei clones bear the extracted soul of Lilith recycled from Rei clone to Rei clone. Therefore, it can be implied that part of Lilith's soul exists in Unit 0 as Rei 1, while the other exists in the current Rei clone. Hence why after Unit 0 and Rei 2 are destroyed, the complete soul of Lilith was likely placed into the third Rei clone, Rei 3. This is likely why this Rei clone seems to be in control of and aware of the fact that she's Lilith, just as Kaoru is aware that he is Adam. Side note: Kaoru is able to control the Eva units because he is Adam, and the Evas are clones of Adam. This is also why he is unable to control Eva Unit 1, because Eva Unit 1 is the only Evangelion that was cloned from Lilith, not Adam. The Eva units serve a dual purpose: to defeat the angels and to be used as part of the ritual of Third Impact, the final stage of Gendo and Scylla's ultimate plan, human instrumentality, the forced evolution of humanity into a higher state. It is never explicitly stated what the difference between Scylla and Gendo's plans are, but they both end in human instrumentality with different outcomes. Gendo wanted to be in control of instrumentality as a means to be with his wife Yui again, hence why he grafted the embryonic body of Adam into his hand. However, during the end of Evangelion, just as Gendo is beginning to initiate Third Impact to bring about the instrumentality of mankind, Rei rejects him, taking Adam into herself, leaving Gendo behind, and starting Third Impact. Gendo is a very complex character. At first, he is seen as a cold, unfeeling, and uncaring absent father to Shinji, and someone who will use any tool in his disposal to defeat the angels and get what he wants. He cares not for the suffering he inflicts on Shinji, going as far as making him nearly kill one of his only friends and making him face the horror of combating the angels. Gendo's relationships with characters are very surface level, never revealing any emotion. He developed a sexual relationship with both Naoko and her daughter Ritsuko Ikagi, but both of them eventually realized he never truly loved them, only Yui. The only person besides Yui that Gendo seems to have a genuine relationship with is, unsurprisingly, Rei, the clone of his beloved wife. However, this relationship is very one-sided. He shows an uncharacteristic amount of affection towards her, even going so far as to severely burn his hands while personally trying to remove her from the entry plug of Unit 0 after it goes berserk. Shinji also notices that Gendo only seems happy when talking with Rei. Rei seems confused by Gendo's affections towards her. She knows she has affection toward Commander Ikari, but doesn't know why or how to express it. This affection likely comes from being a clone of his wife, Yui Ikari. Gendo seems to be a very shallow man, at least after the disappearance of Yui. In the early days of NERV, he uses Ritsuko's mother, Naoko Ikagi, for her genius at computer science, as well as for sexual gratification. Gendo had her develop the Magi system, a supercomputer comprised of 3 components set to imitate Naoko's personality. Melchior, herself as a scientist, Balthazar, herself as a mother, and finally Casper, herself as a woman. Gendo sees the relationship as purely physical, while Naoko does not. This directly impacts her self-worth and spirals her into a fit of rage, which finally erupts when Rei 1 calls her an old hag. Naoko, blinded by rage, kills Rei 1 and then herself after realizing what she'd done. Gendo does the same thing he did to Naoko to her daughter, Ritsuko Ikagi, using her for her intelligence and engaging in a purely physical relationship. Ritsuko loves Gendo, and just like her mother, the truth of the relationship drives Ritsuko to direct her anger towards Rei, specifically her remaining clone bodies, as she destroys them all after the incarnation of Rei 3. During the end of Evangelion, Ritsuko tries to enact her vengeance on Gendo by attempting to detonate Nerve HQ, a decision which must be approved first by the Magi system. In a final act of irony, the Magi computer system built by her own mother rejects the self-destruct command, specifically the Casper component, which exhibits Naoko's self as a woman. Even after death, Naoko chose Gendo over her own daughter. Gendo then shoots and kills Ritsuko, before mouthing something inaudible to the audience, to which she simply responds, "Liar." Side note: the contents of Gendo's inaudible words have been subject to theory and debate for decades, and detailing these theories and implications here would not do them justice. There will be links in the description to pages from the Eva Geeks website where people have gone into excruciating detail on this subject. Please give it a look if you're curious. After killing Ritsuko, Gendo attempts to control instrumentality by merging Lilith and Adam, using himself with the embryonic body of Adam fused to his hand, and Rei, who is the incarnation of Lilith. Rei rejects him, taking Adam into herself from him, initiating the first step of Third Impact, the unholy union of Adam and Lilith, and leaving him behind. In his dying moments, Gendo confesses to a vision of Yui that sending Shinji away and not being a father to him was due to his belief that he would only hurt his son. Kaoru then claims that by this act, Gendo was merely running away. Before being killed by a manifestation of Unit 1, likely caused by the Third Impact, Gendo apologizes to Shinji, in a final act of self-reflection. Many people see Gendo Ikari as the antagonist of Neon Genesis Evangelion. This came as a surprise to me, as for most of the series, Gendo, though admittedly a cold, despicable man who uses others for his own gain, seems to only want to destroy the angels by any means necessary. Nothing Gendo does before the events of End of Evangelion can truly be considered villainous. Many people point to the slaughtering of the angel Bardiel, an angel that infected Unit 4, piloted by Shinji's classmate Toji Suzuhara. Shinji refused to fight, so Gendo ordered the use of the dummy plug system, a device that can take control away from the pilot, sending the Eva into a sort of pseudo-berserk state. Eva Unit 1 then graphically dismembers and mutilates Unit 4, reclassified as the angel Bardiel. With Toji still inside, Shinji begs for his father to stop. Toji survives, but loses his leg above the knee. Even though this act could be seen as horrific, the alternative would have been the destruction of Unit 1 and the possible death of its pilot Shinji, and depending on how far the angel got, it could have initiated Third Impact. Whether you choose to see Gendo as a villain is subjective. In my opinion, Gendo's actions were necessary to defeat the angels, but this does not mean he was a good person. He used the Akagis for personal gain and sexual gratification, throwing them away when they became useless to him. He estranged himself from his own son and was willing to sacrifice humanity just to see his wife again. Gendo, like all characters in Evangelion, cannot be defined by such black and white terms as hero or villain. Shinji Ikari is the 14-year-old protagonist of Neon Genesis Evangelion. He is the reluctant pilot of Evangelion Unit 1 and son of Gendo and Yui Ikari. Shinji Ikari is still to this day seen as one of the most divisive and controversial protagonists in all of anime. Some see Shinji as a cowardly, insufferable brat, while others see him as one of the most human and relatable protagonists to ever feature in the genre. Shinji is summoned to the fortress city of Tokyo 3 by his estranged father, whom he hasn't seen in years. He is picked up by Misato Katsuragi, the head of Nerve's defenses, and shuttled to Nerve HQ in the midst of an angel attack. This is our first exposure to the character, and right away we can tell that he is aloof, a bit cold, and unconcerned with other people, especially his father. Upon arrival at Nerve HQ, Shinji is confronted with Evangelion Unit 1, a massive bipedal weapon, and told by his father to be its pilot and defeat the angel attacking the city. Shinji, being a normal 14-year-old kid, is horrified by the idea of piloting the Eva and fighting the angel, and adamantly denies being able to pilot it. It is only after Gendo guilt-trips Shinji into accepting to pilot by making the heavily injured Rei have to do it that Shinji agrees to pilot the Eva. This is one of the most genius scenes in all of Evangelion, as it defines who Shinji is as a character, as well as differentiating itself from the stereotypes and tropes of other anime at the time. Shinji is a reluctant protagonist. Unlike other anime in the mecha genre, where the protagonist would be excited to pilot a giant robot and fight aliens, Evangelion takes a much more realistic approach. Imagine your father, who you've never seen for most of your life, calls you to a city you've never been for a reason you don't know. You barely survive the journey there, only to be told by your father and everyone around you that you must get inside a gigantic robot and kill a giant alien. A normal person would be reluctant to pilot it. They have no idea how, they don't want to get hurt, they can't do it. Shinji is written like a real person. He doesn't want to do it, he can't. It is only when his father guilt-trips him into agreeing to do it that he decides to pilot the Eva. I believe this is why the low opinion of Shinji as a character persists even 2 decades later. People don't want to see a character react like Shinji. Take for example Luke Skywalker in Star Wars. He meets Ben Kenobi, he gets a lightsaber, and goes off to stop the Empire. Now imagine if Ben Kenobi gives Luke the lightsaber and asks him if he wants to stop the Empire, and Luke says no. He doesn't want to leave his planet, he's never even left town. He doesn't want to use a lightsaber, it's dangerous, and he doesn't know how. People's reactions to the character of Luke Skywalker would be a lot different. However, I think the fact that Shinji is not a normal, exciting protagonist is one of, if not the most important aspect of his character. He's not excited to be a pilot. He's scared. He's just a 14-year-old kid, and he's reacting like a normal 14-year-old kid would. Shinji's relationship with piloting the Eva is a major plot point throughout the series. He doesn't like piloting. It's scary. Imagine being an Eva pilot, being submerged in a strange liquid you're told to let fill your lungs. Imagine how suffocating and instinctually terrifying that would be. Imagine how high up you'd be, taller than most buildings, having to control a body that isn't yours. Being able to feel every cut, stab, burn, impact, broken bone, dismemberment like it's happening to your real body. Piloting is intentionally portrayed as being unpleasant. In fact, Shinji only continues to pilot because, in his words, everybody tells him to. This is an extremely important part of Shinji's character, not only in his relationship with piloting, but as a character entirely. Aside from his relationship with piloting, the nature of his relationships with other people are very important to Shinji as a character. In episode 4, titled Hedgehog's Dilemma, we learn from Misato that Shinji has trouble socializing in school and that he doesn't have any friends, as she can tell by the cell phone she bought him, which never rings. To illustrate Shinji's social troubles, Ritsuko Akagi describes the hedgehog's dilemma. A hedgehog seeks warmth to escape cold weather, and to achieve this warmth, it seeks to huddle around other hedgehogs. However, the hedgehogs must remain separate, or they will only hurt each other with their spines. This is an extremely important line of dialogue. It's a metaphor for the nature of human relationships. People desire to be close to one another, but the fundamental differences between people will ultimately lead to pain or rejection. In Shinji's case, the existence of this rejection keeps him from forming relationships. This concept essentially defines Shinji as a character. He wants nothing more than acceptance and affection from other people, but the idea of rejection from others keeps him from attempting to be close with anyone. However, throughout the series, Shinji develops relationships with several characters. Classmates Toji Suzuhara and Ida Kensuke, fellow pilots Rei Ayanami and Asuka Langley-Soryu, and Misato Katsuragi, the commander of NERV and his legal guardian. Shinji has relationships with these people, but his fear of rejection keeps him from letting himself get too close. Shinji's relationship with Misato is one of a seeming surrogate mother. She is kind and friendly to Shinji most of the time, but she is also his commanding officer, needing to be strict and stern while commanding the Evangelions. This duality often bleeds into their personal relationship as well, with Misato usually being friendly and encouraging to Shinji, but also being stern and telling him what he needs to hear, especially when he doesn't want to hear it. Shinji's relationship with Rei is complex, to say the least. Rei is a clone of his dead mother, who is also a vessel for the soul of an alien god. Initially, she's very cold to Shinji, showing very little emotion, only ever reacting when Shinji doubts the actions of his father, Gendo. Their relationship deepens, however, during the fight with Ramiel. Shinji's worried they might die, but Rei assures him that she will protect him. After the angel is defeated and her Eva is heavily damaged while protecting Shinji, he mimics the actions of his own father, severely burning his hands trying to remove an injured Rei from the entry plug. It is heavily implied, and even outright stated by Shinji at one point, that he sees Rei as possessing qualities akin to a mother, likely subconsciously relating Rei to his own mother, whom he has very little memory of. The fact that Rei is a clone of his own mother likely plays a part in this, whether Shinji realizes that she is or not. Many people have speculated that Shinji has a kind of Oedipus complex, wherein a son resents his father and loves his mother, sometimes sexually, hence the name Oedipus complex. However, this is mere baseless speculation based on coincidental evidence. Most agree that the object of Shinji's affection is Asuka, as he only ever seems to want to befriend Rei or make her feel less lonely somehow. After the death of the second Rei clone, the one present for the majority of the series in episode 23, referred to as Rei 2, the third Rei clone seems to have regained some of the abilities of her soul, Lilith. Shinji apparently realizes that the Rei he knew has died, and that this new Rei, Rei 3, is not the one he knew. During the end of Evangelion, Rei rejects Gendo and chooses to initiate Third Impact not for Gendo, but for Shinji, as she has developed a deeper affection towards him. One of the most interesting relationships is between Shinji and Kaoru Nagisa, the fifth Evangelion pilot delivered to Nerve from Sella to replace the comatose Asuka, and also the vessel of the soul, Adam. Kaoru is introduced in and dies in episode 24, and appears briefly throughout the end of Evangelion. Despite his relatively short screen time, he's one of the most popular characters in Evangelion, mostly due to his relationship with Shinji. At the time of Kaoru's arrival in episode 24, it is very important to note that almost every single person Shinji cares about, or that cares about him, is gone from his life. Rei 2 is dead, having sacrificed herself in Unit 0 to destroy the Angel Armesial, which in turn destroyed Tokyo 3. His classmates have evacuated, and Asuka is comatose after the battle with the Angel Ariel. Save for Misato, he has nobody. Then, Kaoru Nagisa comes into his life. A person who, for the first time in Shinji's life, seems to genuinely care for him. At one point, he even tells Shinji that he loves him. However, Kaoru reveals that he's Adam, the final angel, and commandeers Evangelion Unit 2, descending into the deepest part of Nerve HQ, with Shinji inside Unit 1 in pursuit. Upon seeing the crucified body of Lilith, not Adam as he apparently expected, he tells Shinji to kill him. After a long moment of hesitation, Shinji crushes Kaoru in the hand of Unit 1, killing him. Narratively, the purpose of Kaoru Nagisa as a character is to be the final nail in the coffin, so to speak, of Shinji's mental state. In fact, Kaoru was sent directly to Nerve by Sella, and it is heavily implied that Sella planned for Kaoru to befriend Shinji and then have Shinji kill him, in order to further deteriorate his failing mental state as part of their ultimate plan for human instrumentality. Side note, it is never confirmed that the genuine purpose of Kaoru by Sella is to break the mental state of Shinji, but it is heavily implied during the end of Evangelion from dialogue by members of Sella that the mental state of Unit 1's pilot is important to human instrumentality in some capacity. Given the fact that Kaoru's death causes Shinji to shut down, it is likely that his affection towards Shinji and death at his hands may have been planned by Sella. Shinji's relationship with Asuka is one of, if not the most important character dynamic of Neon Genesis Evangelion. Not only is it the catalyst for almost all of Shinji's actions during the end of Evangelion, it is also the most important look into who Shinji is as a character, what his flaws are, how he thinks, and how he forms relationships. It is also important to note that Asuka is, like Shinji, one of the most complex and controversial characters in the entire series, if not anime as a whole. The relationship between Shinji and Asuka is still a large point of contention between Evangelion fans, as its extreme plot significance is veiled behind metaphor and inference. To put their relationship into its simplest terms, Shinji and Asuka both have romantic feelings for each other, but due to their own neuroses, they are unable to form any semblance of a healthy relationship. Shinji is afraid of rejection, and so doesn't let himself get close to Asuka, regardless of how much he wants to. He cannot admit his feelings towards her. A large part of Asuka's character is her constant need for validation, juxtaposed to her never wanting to feel like she needs other people. She wants to be independent, but also craves praise and attention from others. Asuka will never admit to having feelings for Shinji, because doing so means that she does, in fact, need other people. These relationships ultimately shape Shinji as a character and influence his decision on the instrumentality of mankind during the end of Evangelion. However, decisions are an incredibly important aspect of Shinji as a character. In my opinion, Shinji's biggest flaw as a character is that he is unable to make decisions for himself. We see this constantly throughout the series. Misato asks Shinji why he pilots the Eva if he hates it so much. He responds that he does it because everyone tells him to. When he's asked why he still plays the cello, even though he doesn't need to anymore, he responds, "Nobody ever told me to stop." Even Ritsuko Akagi says that Shinji will just do whatever he is told to do. That's how he gets through life. This theme of indecision is cemented in the infamous hospital scene. The importance of this scene, while shocking, is to cement the fact that Shinji is incapable of deciding for himself. At this point in his life, there's nobody left to tell him what to do. In this scene, he's quite literally begging Asuka to get up and tell him what to do, or just call him an idiot like she normally does. When he sees Asuka in the state that she's in, he cannot decide what to do, and carnal desires instinctually take over. Shinji masturbates over the nude body of the comatose Asuka. After this scene, the JSSDF begin their assault on Nerve HQ. When Misato finds Shinji and saves his life, he has completely given up. He has shut down emotionally and physically. Misato has to literally drag him to safety. After the fatally wounded Misato sacrifices her life to get Shinji to Evangelion Unit 1, Shinji is able to board. After Evangelion Unit 1 begins to awaken and ascends high above Nerve HQ, Shinji then sees the mass production Evangelions hoisting up the mutilated remains of Unit 2 and what Shinji knows to be the corpse of fellow pilot Asuka inside. Shinji's mental state begins to deteriorate even further. Side note, as stated earlier, it is implied that Shinji's deteriorated mental state at this point has been orchestrated by Sella to some extent to influence the outcome of Third Impact, as Keel Lorenz, the apparent leader of Sella, comments on the broken mental state of, quote, Unit 1's pilot as if it were a step in the ritual of Third Impact. Again, it is likely they intended for Kaoru to befriend Shinji and subsequently be killed by him, as implied by Kaoru's famous line to Shinji, "I feel as though I was born to meet you," though this is speculation. A case could also be made that the mass production Evangelions purposely hoisted up the mutilated remains of Unit 2 so that Shinji would be able to see it during Unit 1's awakening, as his mental state completely breaks down afterwards, as illustrated by the ego barrier readings. Shortly afterwards, a giant white being emerges from Nerve HQ after Rei merges with Lilith. Fans lovingly refer to this being as Giant Naked Rei, as it has no official name. It begins cradling Eva Unit 1, which has now become the Tree of Life. Side note, after devouring the S2 engine, or Fruit of Life, of the angel Zeruel in Episode 19, Unit 1 has apparently obtained godlike power, as it has both the angelic Fruit of Life and the Fruit of Knowledge inherent to Lilith-based life. As Unit 1 is the only Evangelion unit cloned from Lilith, not Adam, this fruit is inherent to Evangelion Unit 1. This may be why it transforms into the Tree of Life, as it possesses both fruits. As Giant Naked Rei is essentially Lilith and Adam, it is also both Kaoru and Rei. As both characters have a deep affection towards Shinji, they appear to Shinji and grant him the final decision of human instrumentality. This begins a long introspection sequence where, after a confrontation between himself and Asuka, Shinji again begs her to help him. Asuka famously calls him pathetic, after which he begins strangling her. This signifies his final decision on instrumentality. This is where the third impact and human instrumentality, the evolution of mankind into something greater, truly begins. The giant naked Rei sprouts wings akin to Adam's awakening as humanity breaks down into LCL and their souls join as one. With the souls of Adam and Lilith merged, humanity has essentially created a god. That god gave Shinji the ultimate decision on the fate of mankind. Shinji chose a world without rejection, without suffering, and without pain, resulting in the dissolving of the boundaries between people, reverting them into primordial ooze, or LCL, of which all Lilith-based life formed from, and merging all souls into one. It is in this state of all souls being merged that the most abstract sequence in all of Evangelion takes place. Shinji begins to converse with Rei, Asuka, and Misato, all questioning the meaning in a world without sorrow. What is life without pain? What is happiness without sadness? What is acceptance without rejection? Eventually, Shinji begins to understand that his choices may have been misguided. In a conversation with Rei, she asks him if he likes this new world where everyone is together without boundaries. For what is possibly the first time in Shinji's life, he decides for himself, without any influence from others, that no, he doesn't like this new world. He realizes that the borders between people exist for a reason, and that if there is no rejection, no sorrow or pain, that true happiness and acceptance cannot exist. Rei asks Shinji if he's sure that this is what he wants, that if so, the barriers between people will reform, and life will again be filled with rejection and pain. In a final act of determination, Shinji decides that it'll be alright. As the giant naked Rei begins to fall to pieces, the final person he speaks to is Yui, his mother, the soul within Unit 1. Shinji realizes she's been there all along, and she assures him that everything will be alright. That even though the borders between people had broken down, anyone can choose to regain their form, as long as they have the desire to visualize themselves. In a final farewell to Shinji, Yui famously assures him that even though it may seem bad, anywhere can be paradise, as long as you have the desire to live. Shinji says his final goodbye to his mother, as Evangelion Unit 1, now possessing both the fruits of life and knowledge, as well as both lances of Longinus, drifts off into space. A testament for the rest of eternity that humanity existed. The final scene of the end of Evangelion is one of the most iconic scenes in anime history, and it is just as controversial. Though many consider this to be a depressing ending, I think it's one of the most beautifully written endings of any work of fiction. We see Shinji and Asuka lying on a beach as a red ocean of LCL laps at the shore. The world is in disarray. The corpse of the dead god litters the ground as the bodies of the mass-produced Evangelions form crosses in the distance. A red grid-like pattern covers the earth. Shinji awakens and begins strangling Asuka. She responds by caressing his face, and he begins crying. The final line of the series, Kimochi Warui, or How Disgusting, is then uttered by Asuka. To understand this extremely complex scene, there are a few things that need to be understood. Strangulation is a major recurring theme in Evangelion. Asuka's mother strangles the doll she uses to represent her daughter. Unit 1 strangles the angel Bardiel to death. Naoko Akagi strangles Rei 1 to death. Shinji strangles a representation of Asuka to initiate third impact. And finally, the strangulation on the beach. Arguably the most important theme of Evangelion is the borders between people. Remember the hedgehog's dilemma. The hedgehogs desire warmth, and so seek to huddle near other hedgehogs. They seek comfort in others, but their spines hurt each other, so they must stay separate. They cannot be close to each other. They are rejected. This theme of rejection is heavily featured in the end of Evangelion. Shinji wishes for a world without rejection, and so, a world with no borders between people is created. When Shinji rejects instrumentality and chooses to accept rejection and suffering as a part of life, he and Asuka are seemingly the first people to reform from the sea of LCL. Shinji then strangles Asuka. Strangulation in Evangelion is a metaphor for complete and utter rejection of another person. Shinji has rejected human instrumentality. He has accepted a world where people are separate, where rejection and sorrow exist. When he sees Asuka on the beach, he strangles her. Not out of malice, but out of a desire to be sure that rejection still exists in the world. However, instead of rejecting Shinji back, Asuka instead chooses to caress his face. She chooses to accept him. Shinji, having finally been accepted by another person, begins to cry. The final words of the series, uttered by Asuka, kimochi warui, or sometimes translated as disgusting, are in reference not to the strangulation or to Shinji's tears, but in fact are in relation to what she saw during instrumentality, when all human souls were merged. During this time, all of the contents of one's soul were laid bare for all others to see, and it is implied that Asuka witnessed what Shinji did while visiting her in the hospital. In fact, this line was not actually written in the script. Instead, director Hideaki Anno asked the voice actor of Asuka, Yuko Miyamura, a question. It went something along the lines of, "What would you do if a burglar broke into your home, but instead of stealing anything, just pleasured himself over you while you slept?" Her response was kimochi warui, or what is often translated as disgusting. Shinji Ikari is an extremely complex character, and arguably the most divisive and complicated character in all of anime. I think most people initially dislike Shinji because he isn't a normal anime protagonist. He isn't exactly excited to pilot the big robot and fight aliens. He's scared. He's acting the same way any 14-year-old boy would react when placed in his situation, with fear and confusion. Shinji's not the hero we'd look for in a story. He's weak, scared, awkward, and alone. And the show doesn't pull any punches to get this message across. People don't like Shinji because he isn't a hero. He's just a person forced to enter into a role that nobody else in his world could be prepared for. And he did the best he could. In the end, Shinji's journey isn't about defeating the angels. In fact, I'd argue that the show itself isn't even about defeating the angels. It's about the connection and boundaries between people. Even the Evangelion's most powerful weapon, the AT field, or Absolute Terror field, is a literal manifestation of the boundaries of the soul inside the Eva made physical, the boundaries that separate individuals from one another. Shinji's journey is about accepting himself as being able to exist within a world where people can reject one another, but also a world where people can allow others to enter their boundaries, where people can understand and accept one another. The beauty of Evangelion is illustrated through Shinji's journey, a journey that ends with the hope that people may one day learn to understand one another. So, before we get into the conclusion of this video, I wanted to briefly discuss some things that I didn't get to discuss at length in the video, but that I think are still important. And the reason some of this stuff isn't in the main video is because Originally, the plan for this video was a lot different. It was originally supposed to be an analysis of the 5 main characters, Gendo, Shinji, Asuka, Rei, and Misato, as sort of a framework to explain all of Evangelion, and also to just get all of my thoughts on the series into one place. But as I was writing the script, it was tending to repeat itself, and it wasn't very. I didn't think it would be very fun to watch, so I cut it down to just Gendo and Shinji, because I thought you could get the main point of the show, or what I thought would be the main things to understand about the show. You could illustrate it through the framework of those characters. But I also wanted to include analyses of Misato, Rei, and Asuka, though very brief, at the in sort of this wrap-up segment of the video, because I think that they're still very important to understand Evangelion. So that's why those are here. There's also a few miscellaneous things that would not have fit in the video anywhere else, even if they were formally written into the video. They wouldn't have really made sense, since they have to do with sort of real-world influences, such as the explanation for the religious symbolism and the question of why there's 2 endings to the series, episode 25 and 26 of the main series, and the movie End of Evangelion. Explaining why there's 2 endings sort of has to do with real-world factors. So that's why this stuff is in the wrap-up segment. I also wanted to say thank you guys so much for watching. This video is ridiculously long, and it took a really long time to make, but I love making stuff like this because it's my favorite content to watch. So if you've watched this far, I just want to say thank you. I want to make more stuff like this in the future, and yeah, that's pretty much it. Thanks, guys. To briefly explain Asuka's character, she and Shinji are extremely alike. Both have abandonment issues, and both desire relationships with other people, but avoid them for various reasons. And of course, they're both Eva pilots. Whereas Shinji does not want to pilot the Eva, Asuka enthusiastically pilots the Eva to give herself some kind of self-worth. The self-worth of being an Eva pilot is what she bases her entire opinion of herself on. She's an extremely confident and smug person at the beginning of the series, but as her piloting skills diminish, so does her confidence and opinion of herself. When her piloting status is terminated, she loses all of her smug self-confidence and completely shuts down. Her comatose state is largely influenced by the attack of the angel Ariel. However, I'd argue that even without the attack from Ariel, Asuka would be similarly crushed by the lack of a pilot status. Asuka puts on a facade of a tough, confident pilot, but deep down, she's a very troubled person who seeks validation and praise from other people. She sees piloting as the only thing that gives her life meaning, as it's the only thing that gives her validation and worth. In the end of Evangelion, she finally realizes in some capacity that her mother, who is a massive component in the nature of her mental complex, has been present inside the Eva all along, and that the AT field is the manifestation of her mother's soul. This gives her the strength and courage to fight until her death at the hands of the mass production Evangelions. Her relationship with Shinji is an extremely important aspect of the series, but to sum it up briefly, it is heavily implied, so much so that it is almost outright stated at times, that they have feelings for each other. During the instrumentality sequence, Asuka acknowledges Shinji fantasizing about her and seems to accept it in her own way, saying, "If I can't have all of you, then I don't want any of you." During the final scene of End of Evangelion, it seems that Asuka may have finally accepted Shinji. Rei Ayanami is the name assigned to a series of clones of Yui Ikari implanted with the soul or partial soul of Lilith. There are 3 Rei clones seen throughout the series, replacing each other as they are killed. The first Rei clone, Rei 1, was killed by Naoko Akagi. The second Rei clone, Rei 2, is the Rei clone present for the majority of Evangelion up until her death in episode 22. Rei 3 is the third and final Rei clone, the one who is thought to possess the full soul of Lilith. Rei 3 is present for the rest of Neon Genesis Evangelion after episode 22, and for the entirety of the end of Evangelion. Despite being a clone, Rei Ayanami is portrayed throughout the series as being an independent person. In fact, Rei seems to want nothing more than to understand herself and what her purpose is. Near the end of the series and the end of Evangelion, Rei seems to realize that her purpose is little more than a tool to be used in the ritual of Third Impact to bring about human instrumentality. During the series, she grows more attached to Shinji, due to her being a clone of his mother or not, and eventually rejects Gendo, leaving the final decision of instrumentality to Shinji. Rei appears one final time during the final scene of the end of Evangelion, floating off in the distance, mirroring her first appearance in episode 1, floating off in the distance in Tokyo 3. Rei's seeming omnipotence can likely be explained by her merging with the body and soul of Adam during the end of Evangelion. After the giant naked Rei dies in the end of Evangelion, Rei seems to still exist in some capacity, now unbound by the laws of time and space, allowing her to appear to Shinji in episode 1 and during the final scene of the end of Evangelion. Further cementing this idea is a quote from director Hideaki Anno, where he mentions that Evangelion is a story that repeats. It is also worth noting that the room where, according to Ritsuko Akagi, Rei was born, the words top, bottom, strangeness can be observed on the walls. Top, bottom, and strange refer to types of quarks in the field of quantum mechanics. Interestingly, like Rei, a quark defies the laws of physics, being able to exist in two places at once, and also being unbound by the natural flow of time. Misato Katsuragi is the operations director at NERV as well as the roommate and guardian of Shinji, Ikari, and Asuka. She has an immense hatred for the angels due to Adam's awakening being responsible for the death of her father, and directly tells Shinji that she tries to live vicariously through him to get revenge on the angels. Misato had a past relationship with double, or perhaps triple agent, Ryoji Kaji. After his death, Misato still had feelings for him up until her own death in the end of Evangelion. Misato is portrayed throughout the series as very carefree and flirtatious when not on the job. During instrumentality, Misato is shown to use her sexuality to attempt to get closer to other people, but never actually letting anyone get close enough to form a genuine relationship. She employs these tactics on Shinji as well. The photo provided to Shinji by Misato in episode 1 is pretty self-explanatory. In episode 23, Misato enters Shinji's room in an attempt to comfort him after the loss of Rei, the destruction of Tokyo 3, and a comatose Asuka. Misato says, "Shinji, this is about the only thing I can do to comfort you," as she inches her hand closer to his. He recoils and tells her to stop. In the end of Evangelion, she kisses Shinji, tells him they'll do the rest when they get back, then sends him off to find Unit 1 before dying. Many have speculated that she was merely encouraging him to pilot the Eva in a very dire situation, but after the revelation of her using her own body to form relationships during instrumentality, many still speculate the nature of her intentions. There are two endings for Evangelion, episodes 25 and 26 of Neon Genesis Evangelion, and the movie, The End of Evangelion. This may confuse some people as to which is the true ending. The answer is, like most things in the series, not concrete. The End of Evangelion can either replace episodes 25 and 26, as it takes place after episode 24, or it can occur at the same time as episodes 25 and 26. The original final two episodes take place during instrumentality, and as such, could fit in during the instrumentality sequence of the end of Evangelion without issue. Whether you interpret them as being separate or not is up to you, but they are both canon. As to why there are two endings, The original proposed ending to Neon Genesis Evangelion was heavily changed due to financial issues and censorship issues with the TV networks. The end of Evangelion is closer to the proposed ending of the series. It is extremely obvious to anyone that has finished watching Evangelion that there is an abundance of religious symbolism. It is present in nearly every important aspect of the series. In a surprisingly blunt explanation, staff who worked on Evangelion have stated that the purpose of the religious symbolism was not to serve any deeper meaning, but simply because it, quote, looked cool. Meaningless or not, the religious symbolism is one of the most recognizable aspects of the character of Evangelion, and serves to accentuate the importance of the scenes or plot points it appears in. The best type of media is one that you don't forget immediately after watching. The best kinds of media are ones that leave you thinking about them when you wake up the next morning or remain at the back of your mind for years. Evangelion has managed to stay relevant decades after its conclusion because there has never, and likely will never again, be anything that does what Evangelion did. It presented a story in a genre where the stereotype was shallow characters and nonsensical action, and gave audiences some of the most memorable and human characters ever to exist in the genre even today, as well as a beautifully written storyline that ends with a hopeful message on the nature of mankind. To me, Evangelion is about people. It is a story that uses its characters to illustrate the complexities and hardships of forming bonds and connections between people, and ends with, to quote Rei and Kaoru during their final send-off to Shinji in the end of Evangelion, the hope that one day mankind will learn to understand each other. The boundaries between people are a massive theme in Evangelion, and while what the series means is highly subjective, I think that it is undeniable that these themes have at least some impact on what it's trying to say. Though it is easy to interpret Evangelion's ending as disturbing or negative, I think that it illustrates something beautiful. That even though life may be full of rejection and sadness, acceptance, and even love exists.